Closing in on the mark. No backup needed.
Hello everyone, my name is Serafi and I'm happy to meet you all. And today we're going to talk about Caitlyn, the Sheriff of Piltover. So Caitlyn, I have finally defeated Lysandra with Caitlyn. That took forever. I had several runs that were basically non-starters because Lysandra had the I am inevitable power, which basically shuts Caitlyn down entirely. I had several runs where I was defeated by a node because of the I am inevitable power. I had situations where I didn't roll good powers, or I didn't roll good options at the remitter, so it was a very tough run. It took me about 30 tries to complete, but I finally got it done. And now that I have a full grasp of Caitlyn, of her kit, of her deck, I want to talk about it and explain who she is and what you guys should do with her. So Caitlyn is a control champion with no hard removal, which is rare. Yasuo has stunning, Morgana has stunning. Stunning is very important because stunning allows you to essentially, even if you can't remove a unit, it allows you to put the damage on hold so you can try and build up a board or interact with your opponent in some other way. Maybe remove some of their smaller cards while you try and figure out a way to deal with the big card. Caitlyn doesn't have that. But she's not an aggressive deck either. Even though the card is cheap, she doesn't have many ways to easily take the board and take control of a game. So Caitlyn is, I would say that she's frustrating. She's very good. Now, I do think that she's very strong. For the majority of your game, but I wouldn't take her in an adventure past the 4.5 one. I tried playing the 5.5 weekly adventure with Caitlyn and it was a disaster. The main problem with Caitlyn is that she does not have, like, her gimmick, her entire benefit to playing this card is that she deals very effectively with small, wide boards. And that's good for like the early adventures. Like if you go into Thresh's adventure, the first enemy that you fight is like a spiderling enemy that tries to kind of crowd you out and force you to take a lot of damage so that you can't really easily start a run with like full health. And Caitlyn's really good at dealing with those kinds of enemies. She will easily kill like a 3 health unit that's played on turn 1 or 2 without that unit ever getting a chance to strike her. But that's not what the game is anymore. So Caitlyn feels like she was designed for, Galio and maybe Aurelion Sol. Even though, like, I've had some problems with Caitlyn and with Aurelion Sol. Like, Caitlyn is not nearly as easy to beat Aurelion Sol with as any other character that I have maxed at 3. But, she's definitely not a character that's good against Lysandra or Swain. It's really hard to play her. And you basically need to get the Mortal Marks event power from Lysandra to even win the adventure, and then you're just cheating. You just set all units' health to 0 and that, or to 1, and then you win because of that. So let's talk about the character. Caitlyn. The card. Caitlyn is a 3-mana 3/3 with quick attack. She has strike, plant 2 flash bombs in the top 8 cards of the enemy deck. A Flash Bomb Trap is a spell that deals 1 damage to a random ally when you draw it. So, it's like Teemo Shrooms, except they hit the board, not the Nexus. And originally when Caitlyn was coming out, I was excited. I was like, okay, Teemo Shrooms are bad primarily for 2 reasons. Number 1, they don't control the board, and number 2, they don't get shuffled into the top of the deck, so you could literally just put all of them on the bottom of the deck and then never see your opponent draw them. Caitlyn addresses both those concerns, but then the problem becomes, how do you win? And they try to address that with her second form. Caitlyn's second form has Strike, plant 4 Flash Bomb Traps in the top 8 cards of the enemy deck, and then deal damage to the enemy Nexus equal to the number of traps activated this round. That's really, really good, but the problem is, it's not that good. This will win a game for you when you have 20 health, which is what, the PvP cards are balanced around. But it's not going to win a game for you at 40. It just isn't. So they have to do a lot to make Caitlyn's deck function, and they tried. But it really didn't work. So let's talk about it. Caitlyn's deck, House Swamp, 1 mana, 3/1, with Brash. When I'm summoned, plant 2 Flash Bomb traps in the top 8 cards of the enemy deck. Okay, so this will get you three traps right away, and then if you attack, it's a 4th one. That's solid, and if you go deep into the constellation, this gets Shadow Totem, which is really, really good. But I'm not talking about like the deep constellation. I'm talking about Caitlyn at 3 stars, because that's what most people are going to get. This card's solid. A 1 mana 3 attack unit can block fearsome units, which is really good for dealing with the Lysandra All Things Grow Cold power. But the fact that it only has 1 health means that it dies to a lot. In particular, it will die to a lot of the weekly adventure powers that deal 1 or 2 to the enemy, to the whole board at the end of the turn. So this card's kind of like, it's good for the main game, but it seems really bad for the weekly adventures. And Brash might as well not exist against a deadly enemy, because they'll all have over 3 health. Advanced Intel, 2 mana burst spell. Plant 2 Flash Bomb traps in the top 8 cards of the enemy deck and draw 1. Again, if you get super deep into the tree, into the constellation, this gets Tear of the Goddess. And if it's 0 mana, summon a random 1-cost Poro, draw a card, and plant 2 traps, that's really, really good. Especially since you can draw it off of the Flash Bomb Peddler. But it's not for most people. This is going to be 2 mana for most people. At 2 mana, this card is fine. It's okay. The fact that it gives you a body makes it tolerable, especially since it's a burst speed body. A burst speed body will help you kind of protect yourself against damage, which Caitlyn desperately needs. But I don't think it's good enough. I definitely played this card a lot, but it feels like one of the weakest cards in her deck. Flash Bomb Peddler, 2 mana, 1/3. When I'm summoned, draw a spell. When you play a spell, plant 1 Flash Bomb trap in the top 8 cards of the enemy deck. That stacks with itself, so if you have multiple Flash Bomb Peddlers out, you can get multiple traps shuffled. This card is like a really good card to get items put on, because it's a really solid card as long as you can keep it on the board. But you kind of need to keep it on the board, and if you're keeping it on the board with Caitlyn, you need this card to do something. That's kind of the problem, right? She has cards like the Flash Bomb Peddler, and then there's a 1 mana 0/3 that has, whenever a trap is shuffled, or whenever a trap is triggered, shuffle more of the trap into the deck. You can get for her in the adventure. Those cards are both really good, and you want to keep them out as long as possible, but they don't do anything. Like, they will help your trap plan, but that doesn't kill your opponent. So really one of the biggest problems that Caitlyn has is that her units all lean into the trap strategy, and the trap strategy does not kill the opponent. So it would be fine if the trap strategy was really good at controlling, but it's not. So this card is a card where if you can get like focusing crystal on this, where you every time you play a spell it gets +1/+1 forever, that's really, really strong. If you can get crystal carrier on this so that it gives you a mana every turn, also really, really good. But if you can't get any items on this card, you play it, draw a spell, and then block with it, and that's what it's for. Very mid. Best card in the deck. Okay, so to try and make Caitlyn salvageable, in Riot's defense, they gave her champion spell 2 items. That is, I don't think there's a single champion in the roster other than Caitlyn that gets 2 items on their champion spell. That's crazy. So Piltover Peacemaker, deal 2 damage to a unit and plant Flash Bomb traps in the top 8 cards of the enemy deck. It gets Mana Potion, so it only costs 2 mana instead of 3 mana, and it gets Hextech Fabricator 2, which grants your strongest ally a random rare item this game. The rare items are going to be things like Phage +2/+2, Savage Shield +1/+3. I believe that the one that gives you +3/+1 is also rare. And then one of the biggest ones that I've seen a lot is Regeneration. Regeneration is a rare one. But the one that I've seen the most is special delivery, which is attack, shuffle 5 shrooms into the deck. And I think that's specifically why they chose rare for their option. They want Caitlyn to be able to get the ability to shuffle a lot of shrooms into the deck without Teemo. It's interesting. That's definitely like a win condition for her, but it's too slow in my opinion. Now, as far as why this is good, the main reason that putting a bunch of item cards on your champion spell is good is it makes the Grand General's counter plan really good. The Grand General's counter plan is a relic that says at the start of the turn, add a fleeting copy of the champion to your hand while the champion's on the board, which turns into their champion spell. So you do want the champion spell to be very, very strong for the Grand General's counter plan, and this is a very, very strong spell. This is the best card in the deck. Very frequently, I was able to control the board. If you because this card is in your deck, it's very easy to get item cards on it. And if you can get like either doubling dice so that it has a chance of adding another copy to your hand, or Elixir of Sorcery so that it casts twice, then this becomes like a really, really powerful control card. And really, the Constellation, if they were going to try and lean into her deck, the Constellation, instead of giving like -2 mana to the other spell or Shadow Totem, they should have given Elixir of Sorcery to this card. Because then you would have a clear game plan of just spam Grand General's counterplan and keep Caitlyn on the board as long as possible. This is still okay. Getting a rare item on your best unit every single turn is really, really solid, especially if you can do it more than once. So this is kind of like control the board, get a lot of traps, and then attack with Caitlyn when she's like a 10-10, basically. Sting Officer. Sting Officer is a 2-mana 1/2 that becomes a 2/3 with the item. Nexus Strike, plant 2 Flash Bomb traps in the top 8 cards of the enemy deck, and it has Elusive. Now, it's important that this card is in the deck and gets item cards because the 4th star summons a copy of this to your board. Summoning a 2/3 Elusive at the very start of the game that starts shuffling traps immediately is really, really strong. If you attack with this card on turn 1, it has given you 4 traps. It shuffles 2 when it hits, it shuffles 1 when it's summoned, and it shuffles 1 when it attacks. So you start the game with then 10 traps if you have her Hextech Rifle. That's insane. 10 traps to start with, very, very powerful. So her 4th star is good. And more importantly, you can get other item cards on the Sting Officer since it's in your deck, which will make your starting power even better. So Caitlyn's 4th star is very, very solid. I'm not saying that it's not. It's probably one of the best stars in her arsenal. But that makes Sting Officer like a really important card. So you definitely want to pile as many items as possible onto this card and onto the Piltover Beastmaker. Anytime that you see an item for either one of these, as long as it's not one that makes them cost more, you would definitely get it. Next up, we have Double Agent. 3 mana, 3/3, strike, all players draw 1, and it has Locket of the Iron Solari that gives it barrier. That's really, really good. So this is a really good card because basically it guarantees that you'll trigger its effect twice. Since it has barrier, you can play it, and then you can strike with it, and then it will survive, then you can strike with it again on the next turn. So it's a really good card to play on your opponent's turn as a defensive blocker. It's a really good card to play on your turn to try and trigger more traps. You definitely want your opponent to start drawing cards so that they can trigger more traps and clear their board. And this card is really good to block with, because if you block with it on the left side, the strike ability will trigger, and the opponent will draw a card, and if there's any traps, it will kill their other units before battle fights happen. Now that does make Caitlyn a little bit hard to use with this card, because if this card strikes first, then the unit that Caitlyn is battling could die, and if it dies, then Caitlyn doesn't get to strike, so she can't trigger her leveled up power to hit the Nexus for more damage. But you want the Double Agent to strike first so that you get more traps to trigger so that Caitlyn's burst damage is even higher. So the best thing to do is to give Caitlyn Overwhelm in some way. And sadly, there's not a rare item that gives Overwhelm, so Caitlyn can't get Overwhelm from her shotgun ability, but you can, of course, give her full build or some other item that gives her Overwhelm so that you can try, some other relic that gives her Overwhelm, so you can try and make sure that you will always trigger her ability even if Double Agent is on the board. Next up, we have Justice Rider. Justice Rider is a 4 mana 5/7. Whenever your opponent draws, plant a Flash Bomb trap in the top, I believe it's the top 2 cards of the deck. I hate that the item cards like obscure the cards themselves. Hold on. Let me check my... Justice Rider. Top 8, okay. Alright, so it's like the other ones. One card in the top 8 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's every time they draw a card, and you want them to draw more cards, so you're going to be encouraging them to draw a lot of cards. So this card has a lot of synergy with her deck, and more importantly, it's a 5/7. So, finally, we have a good stat. I like this card. I think that it's a very solid card, but it's actually really hard to play. The 4 mana really interferes with you because you're trying to play the Piltover Peacemaker every single turn. Maybe it's correct to play Archangel Staff on Caitlyn, just, like, even though the mana discount happens, so it's only 2 mana, that's kind of why I'm, like, leaning away from using Archangel Staff, because it's not 3 mana like Morgana's is. But even so, like, it really feels like you don't have enough mana to ever play Justice Rider, unfortunately. It's a really good card. Then lastly, we have Officer Squad. This is hilarious. My favorite card, my favorite follower ever. I don't know if you guys saw the first stream, but I've never, like, played this card, and I played it on stream for the first time, and it's literally these 2 guys that are just, like, every time that you summon them, they just start talking about how they're gonna beat a door down. And it's amazing. Like, this guy has a huge battering ram, and he's just like, and someone's like, they always try and run, and he's like, and we always find them. And they're just so hyped about breaking down a door to arrest someone. It's great. And then the skill, the deck gives you Shadow Totem, so they summon 2 of them at the same time, so it's like they're talking to each other, which is really great. But the Shadow Totem is actually very important, because every time this card is summoned, it adds a Most Wanted to your hand. And Most Wanted is a 3 mana spell that says, pick a player to discard their lowest cost card and draw 3. So you target your opponent, they toss a card, they draw 3. They trigger the traps in the top 3 cards of the deck. And since you have Shadow Totem, you get a second one. So you play it again for 3 more mana, your opponent draws, now they've drawn 6 cards from the top of their deck. Your trap shuffling only happens in the top 8, and the Hextech Rifle, if you have it, when you whiff on all the first traps, they're going to get shuffled into the top 8 again, which means that when you play the second round, you'll be drawing even more traps than you otherwise would have. So you want your opponent to draw 6 cards, and then you just, like, they just draw all these cards, and then they trigger, like, 40 traps, and then you play Caitlyn with Gatebreaker, and Caitlyn will immediately level up, strike the Nexus, and then when she strikes the Nexus for, like, 3, her ability triggers, and they take 1 damage for each trap that's triggered this round, which is 40, so they die. That's the idea of the Hextech Rifle. So let's talk about relics. Alright. Hextech Rifle, this is a paid relic. I spent $10 on this. It was totally worth it because it also gave me 60 fragments, so I could immediately get Caitlyn to 3 stars. Power, at the start of the game, plant 6 traps into the top 8 cards of the enemy deck. When a flash bomb trap misses, plant it back into the top 8 cards of the enemy deck. So none of this has to be, none of this, since it's a power, all of it triggers even though Caitlyn's not on the board. So you do kind of want to, like, there's like a middle ground, right? You kind of want to hold Caitlyn in your hand so that you can trigger the Gatebreaker every time that you have, like, a bunch of traps go off. But then you also want Caitlyn on the field so that you can start, stacking items and shuffling traps into the opponent's deck with the Grand General's Counterplan. So the nice thing about Grand General's Counterplan is it does add, like, a champion spell to your hand, but that champion spell is the actual champion. So you can, in addition to, like, stacking items and shuffling cards into the deck, you can also block with Caitlyn. And if you block with Caitlyn, she'll strike the Nexus for the amount of damage, the amount of traps that you draw on this turn. Then the Grand General's Counterplan card that was in your hand turns back into Caitlyn. You drop her for another 3 mana, and then her Gatebreaker will immediately strike the Nexus, and you burn your opponent for more damage. So you can kind of, like, on your opponent's turn, be playing this game of, like, block with Caitlyn, chump block with Caitlyn, and then immediately play her again, because you're getting another Caitlyn every single turn. Now, this does mean the deck focuses entirely around Caitlyn. I said it repeatedly, this deck does not have a win condition. Caitlyn is the only thing you can do. So you definitely want either Caitlyn or Teemo, and you want them on the board, like, all the time, but you also want to have them in your hands, so it's hard. It's really hard to win high-level encounters with this character. You can play full build if you don't have Hextech Rifle. Full build will give you Challenger, Tough, and Overwhelm. Tough's really good for making sure that your unit doesn't die. Challenger to make sure that you can actually trigger the strike effect every turn, and then you can also, have Caitlyn pull a unit that's going to either live through the traps bursting from your main guy, or like pull a unit that she can like pierce through with overwhelm, and then your double agent will be able to trigger repeatedly, and Caitlyn will still hit the Nexus. So full build is really good. Hextech rifle is just better. And then the Grand General is kind of planned to get your Piltover Peacemaker every single round. And then the last thing is the Curator's Gatebreaker, which is a rare relic that says -1 attack, play, I strike the enemy Nexus. So you can play Stalker's Blade instead of the Grand General, the Curator's Gatebreaker. Stalker's Blade is when I'm summoned, I strike the weakest unit. So Caitlyn would not have -1 attack in that case, and then she would still hit the enemy Nexus for however many traps have landed this turn. The difference between Gatebreaker and Stalker's Blade is very minimal. It's just that if you've blown the entire field up, which you usually will with the most 1 cards, there will still be a target. Because if you play Caitlyn and you have Stalker's Blade and your opponent doesn't have any units, well, then the Stalker's Blade doesn't do anything and Caitlyn doesn't strike the enemy Nexus. So that's why Gatebreaker is probably better. Although you could play both of them if you really wanted to. Alright, so that is the relics. That is the game plan for Caitlyn. I think that Caitlyn is probably not a unit you want to invest too much into. There are better 6-star units if you have the Piltover crystals. Echo is really, really good. Jinx is fine. And they will probably release Victor or Heimerdinger in the next update. I think that Caitlyn is a very fun character, but she's not like a competitive POC like race against the 6.5 adventure characters, unless you have her at 6 stars. I assume that her 6 star makes her insane, but that's a really, really like big grind. And then as far as Vi, I think Vi is less of a disappointment than I was expecting, but I still wouldn't like put too much effort into her. That's my review. My name is Sarafi, and I hope this guide helped you all.